San Jose, California sits in the heart of Silicon Valley, a city shaped by technology, ambition, and the steady rhythm of ordinary neighborhood life. In the summer of 2003, it was a place where families trusted their streets, where children rode school buses home every afternoon without giving it a second thought. July 8th of that year started like any other Tuesday. Schools were still running, parents were still at work, and a 9-year-old girl named Jeanette Tamayo was on her way home, completely unaware that the next several days would change everything she knew about fear, survival, and the strength buried deep inside her. Jeanette stepped off the school bus and walked toward her front door as she had done hundreds of times before. When she reached the entrance, she noticed that the screen door was sitting slightly open. She assumed her mother, Rosalia, had come home early from work. It did not alarm her. She walked inside, set down her things, and headed toward her bedroom. What she found there stopped her cold. Her bedroom window had been smashed from the outside. Broken glass covered the floor, glittering under the afternoon light. Before she could process what that meant, she reached for the phone to call her mother. The line was dead. The cable had been cut. Then came a knock at the front door. A man she did not recognize was standing on the other side of the screen. He was asking questions, leaning slightly forward, trying to see past her into the house. Every answer she gave him, he redirected into another question, buying himself time, scanning the interior with careful, deliberate eyes. The feeling that rose in Jeanette's chest was immediate and instinctive. She began to slowly close the door. Before she could shut it completely, he slid his hand through the gap and forced it open. He grabbed her and pulled her toward her brother's bedroom. What happened in that room over the next half hour is not covered here out of respect for Jeanette. When it was over, the man bound her wrists in handcuffs and tied her ankles together. He lifted her off the bed and carried her toward the garage where his car was parked. He reached down to open the garage door, managing to lift it only a few inches before another car rolled to a stop directly in front of the driveway. It was Rosalia's car. From the back seat, Jeanette saw the garage door crack open just wide enough for her younger brother Paul, who was 15, to peer underneath. She told him to run. He heard her, but the man was already moving. He stepped out of the car and walked toward Paul with calm, deliberate strides. Paul grabbed a screwdriver from the workbench and charged at him anyway. The man disarmed him without effort and hit him in the face, again and again, until Paul had nothing left. He then dragged the boy back inside the house, where they came face to face with Rosalia standing in the hallway. Rosalia fought. She threw herself at the man, pulling him away from her son long enough for Paul to break free and race toward the kitchen. He came back with a frying pan and swung it at the man. The man took it from him and turned it on Rosalia, striking her over and over until she collapsed to the floor. Then he turned around, walked back through the garage, and got behind the wheel. As the car backed out, Jeanette pressed herself against the seat and managed to turn around just enough to see through the rear window. Rosalia had made it to her feet. Her face was badly wounded, covered in blood, but she was alive, running after the car as it pulled away. Paul was farther back, limping toward a group of bystanders on the sidewalk, waving his arms and screaming. The car turned the corner and the house disappeared. Jeanette began slamming her shoulder against the car window, trying to get the attention of drivers passing alongside them on the road. Her kidnapper reached back immediately and drove the screwdriver into her twice. She slid down from the window and lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling of the car. She told herself she was not going to make it out of this alive. By the time emergency services arrived at the Tamayo home, Rosalia was refusing to get onto a stretcher. She was desperate to communicate everything she knew to the officers standing around her. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and her panic was making it nearly impossible for her to speak clearly. She was eventually placed on a gurney against her will. Paul, still bleeding, was secured and treated at the scene. Both were transported to the nearest hospital. The house itself became the only thing left to work with. The detective assigned to the case, Heather Randall, walked the scene with a careful eye. The first thing that stood out to her was the garage. There was a significant amount of blood. The violence that had taken place there was not subtle. The question that immediately settled in her mind was whether Jeanette would be found alive. Randall initially considered the possibility that some of the blood belonged to Jeanette herself. Her forensic team collected samples while she arranged for canine search units to begin tracking. The bloodhounds were deployed as quickly as possible, but they came up empty. Jeanette and her kidnapper had left in a car. There was nothing to follow. While the search teams worked the surrounding streets, Randall noticed a security camera mounted on the driveway of a neighboring property. The footage was retrieved and reviewed immediately. What it captured was a rough but coherent sequence of events. 30 minutes before Jeanette arrived home, a man had broken her bedroom window and entered the house. He searched through it, then returned to his car and waited. When Jeanette's school bus stopped down the street, he followed her to the door. He was inside for nearly 30 minutes before the car moved again. In the final frames of the footage, the car was visible for a brief moment as it passed directly in front of the camera. In California, issuing a statewide Amber Alert requires a name, a license plate number, or a phone number tied directly to the suspect. The footage showed the car, but the quality of the recording made the plate unreadable. There was not enough there to meet the legal threshold. Without an Amber Alert, the search for Jeanette Tamayo would have to reach the public through other means. Randall pushed hard. Local media were briefed. Helicopters went up over the city equipped with loudspeakers calling Jeanette's name across neighborhoods and rooftops. Flyers with her photograph were distributed throughout San Jose as quickly as they could be printed. Press conferences were held back-to-back to keep her name in the public eye. All of it was done with a sense of urgency that every person involved understood deeply. Past the 48-hour mark, the likelihood of finding a kidnapped child alive dropped sharply. Jeanette did not know any of this. What she did know was that the car had stopped. Her kidnapper pulled into the garage of a large white house. He lifted her out of the car, carried her up a staircase to the second floor, and opened a locked door at the end of the hallway. The room behind it was small. There was a bed, a television, a narrow window, and a bathroom. He dropped her onto the floor. Over the following hours and days, he assaulted her repeatedly. Each time he was finished, he would lock her wrists to the shower head with the handcuffs and run the water. The shower became the only space in that room where she felt temporarily untouched, the only place he left her alone. The following morning, while her family gathered around Rosalia in San Jose, Jeanette's kidnapper sat watching the news. Coverage of her disappearance was being broadcast across local stations. At one point, a member of her family appeared on screen and spoke directly into the camera, using Jeanette's name, telling her to stay strong, telling her that people were out looking for her and that she should not give up. Jeanette watched from across the room. She heard every word. Something inside her hardened. Either she was going to find a way out of that room, or she was going to die trying. By her second day in captivity, she had settled on a strategy. If she could make him trust her, even slightly, she might create an opportunity. She asked him where he was from. It was the most casual question she could think of. He turned to look at her with suspicion, but did not react with hostility. He almost smiled. Jeanette felt disgust move through her entire body. She smiled back. Then she asked him for a glass of water. He handcuffed her and left the room. The moment he was gone, she worked at the handcuffs with her fingers. She had already noticed that the mechanism did not require a key. There was a small button and a latch on the inside of the cuff. If she moved the latch in the right direction and pressed the button at the same time, the cuff opened. She was free within seconds. She had less than a minute. She and her brother Paul had grown up watching forensic investigation programs on television. She knew what detectives looked for. She crossed the room to where her kidnapper had placed a few items meant to occupy her. There was a small clay turtle among them. She grabbed it. She moved to the nightstand and took his watch, which he had left behind. Then she went to the bathroom floor and retrieved her underwear. She had remembered seeing investigators on those television programs collect clothing from victims of assault to use as evidence. She wanted to make sure there would be something for them to find if she did not survive. His footsteps on the stairs came sooner than expected. She jumped back onto the bed and pressed the cuffs against her wrists to make them appear locked. He walked through the door and looked at her without speaking. She stayed completely still. He left the room again without touching anything she had hidden. On the third day, the Tamayo family was fractured and desperate. Rosalia, recovering from her injuries, was being told that the odds of finding Jeanette after 72 hours were not favorable. She refused to accept it. She had survived a man beating her with her own kitchen cookware. She was not going to accept that her daughter was gone. Inside the locked room across the city, Jeanette continued working on her kidnapper's trust. The slow, careful performance she was putting on had begun to have an effect. He asked her if she was hungry. She said yes. He handed her his cell phone and told her to call and order pizza. He gave her the phone number directly and told her the address. She repeated it back to him. She said it calmly, as if none of those words meant anything to her. Inside, she memorized every syllable, the number, the address, every piece of it. When the pizza arrived, the kidnapper went downstairs to collect it. He came back up holding the box with a slight smile on his face. On top of the cardboard, there was a missing person flyer. It had her face on it. He looked at her without saying anything for a moment, then told her he would be getting rid of her that night. He set the pizza down and left the room. Jeanette did not touch the food. She worked quickly. She gathered the watch, the clay turtle, the underwear, and any other small items she could find that might carry something useful. She packed them all into the pizza box and slid it under the bed. When he came back, he picked up a pillow from the bed and pressed it down over her face. She pushed against it with everything she had. He was stronger. The oxygen ran out fast. As the edges of her vision began to close in, some final rush of energy moved through her body and she turned her head sideways just enough to take one small breath. He held the pillow down for a few more seconds, then pulled it away and asked if she wanted to take a shower. After the shower, she got dressed quickly, keeping the items she had gathered tucked on her body. A short while later, someone knocked loudly at the front door of the house. Her kidnapper threw himself across the room and covered her mouth with his hand before she could make a sound. She did not fight him. She waited. The knocking stopped. The house went quiet again. He took her downstairs into the garage in complete darkness. He put her back in the car, replaced the handcuffs and drove. The ride lasted over 30 minutes. Jeanette tracked the turns as best she could, but the length of the route made it much harder than before. She cried most of the way, stopping occasionally to try to gather herself. She told herself that she had done everything she could. She began quietly to prepare for the possibility that this was the end. The car eventually slowed and pulled into the parking lot of a liquor store not far from the highway. Neon light filtered through the windows. The man reached back and grabbed her by the hair. He pulled her close and told her, in a voice that was low and specific, that if she told anyone what had happened, anyone who she had seen or what she knew, he would find her family and he would kill them. Then he would kill her. He let go. Jeanette ran toward the store entrance. The man behind the counter looked at her and immediately recognized her face from the television coverage. He handed her the phone without hesitation. She was shaking too hard to dial. He took it back and called for help himself. When Heather Randall received word that Jeanette had been found alive in East Palo Alto, she moved without stopping. She arrived at the scene and approached the girl carefully, introducing herself by name. Before Randall could ask her first question, Jeanette reached into her pockets and began pulling out items one by one. The watch, the clay turtle, the underwear. All of it gathered and preserved through 3 days of calculated survival. Randall asked her if there was anything else. Jeanette asked for paper. She drew the house. She wrote down every piece of the address and the phone number she had memorized when the pizza was ordered. She sketched what she remembered of the interior layout. Then she looked at Randall and said she thought she could lead them back to the house. A patrol car headed toward San Jose with Jeanette in the back seat. Another unit began calling pizza restaurants in the area to cross-reference the phone number against a registered address. The two lines of information were closing in on the same point from different directions. Jeanette sat up in the back of the car and began calling out turns as they drove through the city. Left, right again, straight. The car followed every direction she gave. She spotted it before anyone else did. She was standing in the back seat when she recognized the house and told them to stop. A short time later, the phone number was confirmed as matching the address. A tactical team and a 9 unit were sent in to execute the entry. They had a layout of the interior provided by Jeanette. The team moved through the house and located the suspect hiding in the attic. He attempted to resist and threatened the officers inside. The dogs were released. He suffered injuries to both arms during the takedown. He was removed from the property and taken into custody. His name was David Montiel Cruz. Inside the house, Heather Randall made her way up to the locked room on the second floor. She found the pizza box under the bed exactly where Jeanette had said it would be. The evidence inside was intact. David Montiel Cruz was charged with 9 felony counts, including burglary, sexual assault, rape, forcible lewd acts, battery, and additional special circumstances. He was prosecuted and sentenced to life in prison. Rosalia received the call as soon as Jeanette was secure. Emergency services transported Jeanette to the hospital, where her wounds from the screwdriver attack were treated. When Rosalia and Paul arrived and the door opened, Jeanette's first reaction upon seeing her mother's still damaged face was not relief for herself. She reached out and touched the bruising on Rosalia's cheek and asked if she was hurt. She had just survived 3 days of captivity, assault, and a suffocation attempt, and her first thought was someone else's pain. The years that followed were not easy. Jeanette carried the weight of what happened to her without letting many people see it. For a long time, she barely left the house. The fear she felt was not abstract. It was attached to specific things, specific sounds, specific faces, men, open spaces, the outside world. She spent 6 years in therapy before something shifted. She was 15 when she first began to feel like the ground beneath her had stabilized enough to move forward. By the time she was an adult, she had made a decision about what to do with what she had survived. She enrolled in law enforcement studies. Her goal was not complicated. She wanted to become a detective. She wanted to sit across from someone the way Heather Randall had sat across from her in that parking lot, with patience and steadiness, and help them find their way back. She also became a public voice for missing children and victims of violence, using what she had been through not as something to hide, but as something that could reach other people still inside their own versions of that locked room. 12 years after the night, she directed a patrol car back to a house she had memorized while in handcuffs. Jeanette Tamayo and Heather Randall were reunited on camera. Jeanette thanked her. Randall told her the truth, which was that what Jeanette had done, the methodical thinking, the patience, the courage she had chosen when fear could have completely taken over, was the reason she was alive. It was the reason David Montiel Cruz was in prison. Jeanette was 9 years old. She had no training, no weapon, no phone, no way to call for help. She had a small clay turtle, a man's watch, a pizza box, and the ability to remember which way a car turned. She used all of it, every single piece, and she brought herself home.